Hey, how's it going out there for everybody? This is Terrell Lewis. I'm doing another video on eschatology class and what's coming up and what's been going on in the world. Many people believe and know that we are in the last days and the last days of the world as we know it before Christ comes back. And there's some things going on that are kind of concerning. People are up in arms. You see all these things going around, particularly with the coronavirus. But it's all part of say smaller and conspiracy is smaller plan because everything that's happening is happening in sections and kind of gradually. So in the past I've talked about the conglomerates because what happens is if we look at the scripture, and I'll pull this up in Revelation chapter 13, it talks about the coming world order, and in very popular scripture because a lot of horror movies like to talk about the mark of the beast and they put their spin on it. Probably the first big one that I remember was The Omen. Yeah, I had a hard time sleeping with the curtains cracked or the closet door cracked when I went to bed. I was about 8 or 9 years old and I was terrified. But it's funny how little actual biblical content was in any of the Omen movies. They were all pretty much garbage, but got everybody's awareness and looking up Revelation chapter 13. In this particular passage at the end of chapter 13, I'll read the last few verses. And it says, start at verse 16. It says, and he calls, this important word, causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark on their right hand or their forehead, and that no man might buy or sell save that that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that understands count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666, which is 666. Because of that, people were terrified. Oh, 666, oh, I don't want that number. Oh, I don't want that P.O. box. Which I guess being related with that scripture, I can have some understanding of that. But the number itself has no power. The number of itself means nothing. It's no more significant than 665 or 667. It's just a number. But it's in this passage, it represents the number of man, which is the number of Antichrist, and it has really no relevance until that time comes. It means nothing. I mean, can't do nothing. It's not more somebody that likes the number. They're not more evil than the next person. It depends on what's on in their heart. But this number is going to be somehow, I believe, encoded into a system that's going to be able to track everyone. The most important thing to remember, it says that no one has the ability to buy or sell, which means a control of the markets, which means if you go to the store, you cannot make any purchases unless you have this mark on your hand. You can't go to the mall and buy that dress, purse, shirt, sweater, or whatever, car, purchase a home unless you have this number, and that's in part of this system. No one really understood this obviously back then because that was unheard of. How can you keep people from buying and selling unless you have something set up that allows you to do that? Today we have that system. It's in place. It started back in the 30s. Really, the effort, which was under the group called there's a technocracy movement, from which we get our word technology. And what they needed with this system to work was the ability to track everyone's behavior, movements, and ability to purchase and sell. Obviously, back in the 1930s, they didn't have nowhere anything close with that ability. It was like a dream. So they knew it had to be developed. So the people that set this up, the technocracy movement, which is, you can still pull them up on the line today. They're alive and well and still pushing the same agenda. Their goal and effort was to come up with a system that people were dependent on, that they would willfully accept and they would willfully not resist. I mean, they would just go along with it and accept it. So the word technology became the new word, the study of, as when you hear ology. Um, and what it did was it showed that, hey, we can, if we develop this, it'll make your way of life easier. And through technology, we've seen the advancement of a lot of new things, which truthfully make things a lot easier. I mean, thank God for the microwave and a few other things that we see today. Cell phone usage, these things are great, but on the darker side, which all these things in technology always have a, or pretty much anything can be used for positive and always also have a negative application. They created a dependency. People have become dependent. You take away somebody's cell phone and they might need therapy. Who knows? I mean, we need cars, we need these things, but there's a darker side. These things are being used and have the potential to be used for evil purposes. And the purpose here I'm speaking of specifically is the ability to track and the ability to monitor everything you're doing. Obviously, if you try to present this to somebody, hey, we need to know what you're doing, we need to know what time you're going to go home, we need to know who all your friends are, who all your family members are, we need to know all this, we need to know this. Who's going to go for that? I'm not. No one is. I mean, the one system that really tried to put that in place was communism. And no matter how much people claim they like communism or advocate for it, and socialism, which is another system that requires maximum of accountability to a government entity, people get tired of that after a while. That's why when I lived in Europe, every person I met wanted to come to America. They were telling me about in Russia and China, to go travel somewhere, like take for instance, you wanted to go to another state or another region, you had to have permission. You had to check in, let them know where you were going in advance, who you were going to see, why you were going, and when you were going to be coming back. Then you had to wait for the permission. And then on your way, when you go through checkpoints or border regions, they verify that it's okay for this person to do that. And I can tell you right now, no American is going to feel like going through that, and I don't. But it's a part of a totalitarianistic system that requires maximum accountability of every citizen, and no one's willfully going to accept that. So what they're doing is they create and they have situations that come up where people willfully give the information. I'm amazed, and I'm pretty sure many of you know somebody or have that one person in your family or friend where you know everything they did. If you go on Facebook, yeah, such and such is at Subway, and then an hour or so later, that same person is at the mall, or they're at a store, or they're doing this, and they're just willfully giving their whereabouts and all the information. So it's funny how something that couldn't be forced upon people, put in a right platform and presented a certain way, like on Facebook, people willfully giving all that information. You can go on Facebook, if you're friends with somebody, you can tell who all their cousins are, who all their families are, favorite restaurant, favorite movies, book, because it's willfully given. Even the police have said they've cracked some cases and closed cases, cold cases, because people blabbing about what they did or what they did a long time ago, and they were just openly talking about it, giving too much information. And it's funny, what you couldn't force out of people, they're just giving it away. And it's funny how that system works. But there is a system, a saying written by, it's one of the Hegelian principles, one of Hegel's writings. You can pull him up online. But he says people will always give up freedom for the sake of security. So the other end that they're using to get control of people is to present a threat. Any, be it global, be it from a terrorist group, from this, that, or whatever, people will give up freedoms to feel safe. And when I teach the class, I talk about how in the world could you get somebody to live in a house with bars and 10-foot wall around the outside? Why would anybody willfully go and buy a house like that? Well, you present them with the correct threat or a series of threats, and they may do that voluntarily in order to feel safe. And so what we see happening in our world and our countries today is a threat presented, then freedom's lost. It's happening over and over. 9/11 was one. I mean, terrorism, you name it. And I'm talking about this most recently because the newest chapter in this loss of freedom and seizure of our personal information is the COVID virus, the coronavirus, which has introduced COVID-19, which is the certificate of ID. And that was actually introduced long before the coronavirus showed up. There was a plan to have people give up their information, personal information, health records, health history, because of the coronavirus. There was a plan started. I think you were talking about it last summer, the first time that I remember seeing it in the media. Bill Gates was talking about the need to have a system to control or a system to track everyone and their health status, because he was talking about the ability to be able to see when a person is sick. They have some new small microchips that they can input in your blood that has the ability to track over 70 viruses. And if people had that, they could see when you contracted a virus, and they could either program the virus to attack it, or they could use that system to trigger an alert so you can go to the hospital and get treated. And they were talking about applications for that for cancer, heart disease, all these different things, and the benefit of it. And people are not going to go for that unless you present a problem. And guess what shows up on the scene? The coronavirus, conveniently, a year after they were already talking about introducing such a system. And they were talking about doing it through what's called contact tracing. And that's why there's almost $2 billion, I believe, put into contact tracing so they can track people. They're talking about putting apps in on the phone. If you notice, before we even had all the information on the coronavirus, they were already had ready, like they had it out their back pocket. Hey, we have this app that can track people that has corona. But it's funny, this system is already put in place in China. I've talked about it in the past in class and put some information out about it called social credit system. And it's a means where, based on your behavior, where you go, things you do, you rack up a credits. It's social credit score, much like the credit system. And depending on what your score is, it determines what you can do, where you can go, if you can purchase a car, travel. There's people in China who score isn't high, so they can't travel on planes or trains, and restricted to buses. And that credit score can affect people you know. So if a person has a certain score, if all their friends' score is low, that'll drag their score down. So there's kind of puts pressure on people to encourage the people that they're around and associated with to keep their credit score high. And the credit score is based on the things that the government considers positive, and that's how you get your score up if you're a good citizen. And what we're looking at today is how this coronavirus is opening the door up for another angle for tracking of people's behavior and activities and whereabouts because of a threat. Now, there's been a new report, conclusive report, put out, and I posted it here a couple of days ago, and it's been peer reviewed, and it was done in Switzerland, based in Switzerland. It's called the Swiss Policy Research, and it's facts about COVID-19. You have input from Oxford University, different universities around the world, Stanford, doctors, virologists from around the world, and they have a ton of information. But it turns out the coronavirus, from the final information that they've put out, which is, I mean, the report is exhaustive, footnotes, sources, everything. And so it's not political. Actually, they point out how politics has affected the coronavirus. There's no politics. There's no one party from another. So that's how they approached it from the medical standpoint. And they also point out areas where politics has changed perception and policy. The United States is probably the most politicized regarding the virus. I mean, with little regard to the actual virus itself. Because I encourage everyone to go take a look at it. Just type in Swiss policy research and it should come up for you. But and conclusively, the coronavirus is no more deadly than the influenza. And the funny part about that, or sad part about it, the fatality rate for coronavirus is falling through the floor, and is equivalent now to the to influenza. But it's funny, as they're doing more testing and the fatality rate falls, no policy is changing. I mean, in the study, I mean, you can look it up for yourself, look at the numbers. They have charts, graphs, and everything else in there, that the social distancing and the masks are doing nothing. And it's funny how this report is similar to some of the top virologists, what they were saying back in March. Dr. Vutar, Dr. Shiva were saying those same things back in March, and that they suggested that it's best to not socially distance, as they did in a couple countries like Sweden, whose fatality rate in the study, if you look it up, the death toll between January and April is actually lower than it was the past 2 years. I was really surprised to see that. There's a bunch of information in there. It's really great to look at. But the most important thing about the virus is not the virus itself or the statistics. It's the long-term effects. Long after we have a vaccine for it, we're still going to be still be stuck with this contact tracing and this requirement for people, if you've been around somebody with corona, that they're going to track your phone and they're going to put alerts on there. And along with House Resolution 6666, which I've talked about in the past, they'll have the ability also to, if you have it, that they can come in your home and doing any number of things legally. But all this ties into the fact that this is all an invasion of your privacy. This is an invasion on your well-being. And worst of all, it's more of the federal government's ability, and what will eventually be a global government's ability, to have an effect on your home and track what you're doing. And the fact that they can do that means that they'll have control of what you can and can't do, what you can and cannot purchase. And the reason why that's becoming easier is because of consolidation. I'll be talking about that a lot in my next book. The consolidation aspect is that a government or a dictatorship, a global dictatorship, as the Bible tells us, coming headed by the Antichrist, is going to require few places or few sources that control each industry. I've talked about it, and many people I've talked to are already realizing how much of the information out there in media is controlled by a couple sources. As some videos, information that's out there will show you, there are 6 companies that own all the media that comes out. Here, I'm going to pull that up real quick. They own all the media that comes out of our that's put out there. And there are conglomerates and companies that control companies that you may not have even heard of, that are out there, like Alphabet. People would probably automatically assume that, say, that Google was probably one of the largest corporations in the United States. No. Google's owned by Alphabet, who owns a bunch of other companies, and a lot of ownership of businesses and control of things that we see every day are owned by people that we've never heard of and likely don't know about. Of the 6 companies, let me pull this up. Comcast, Disney, Time Warner, National Amusements. Actually, I wasn't even aware of them being on the list. See, Comcast, Time Warner, News Corp, Sony, which I've talked about, then Standard Oil of New York. Almost the vast majority of Hollywood entertainment is owned by Standard Oil of New York, which is why when you have someone that owns all that, they can filter down, give instructions and filter down the type of media information that's going to go out. So that way the information we have is controlled. And the reason why that's important to know is because if you have a singular goal and effort to push the public to believe something, then you can control it at the top and filter it down to the others, and everyone has to fall in line because every company has to comply with their or subordinate of the company that's over them. So when they filter things down from the corporate management level, everyone underneath has to comply. And if you as an individual don't like it, hope you got your resume ready, because they'll toss you. You have to go on monster.com, try to find a job. And not only the information, which is I think that's crucial, is industries. The largest, Alphabet, is actually the number 2 conglomerate in the United States. The number 1 is called Berkshire Hathaway, and their hands are into everything, publishing, jewelry. Their net revenue, I believe, is $552 billion. Yeah, that's some nice change right there. And we're talking annual. In other words, the biggest mistake they can make, they're still pulling in, I don't know, ship's load of revenue, because they own companies that own companies that own companies, which is partly another reason why I don't advocate boycotting, because you're only inconveniencing yourself. I've mentioned this before. If you boycott one store, the company that owns that store owns their competitors as well. So you're running over here, probably going out the way, maybe even sometimes spending more money because you're trying to boycott this store, and you're not hurting anyone ultimately, because the same people who gave them, or maybe partly responsible for what this one company did that you're boycotting, is also the owner in ownership of their competitors. So they're still getting your money. The devil, when he comes, has to have everything set up. He's not going to have time to do all this consolidating, putting all this stuff together. So there are people that work for him that own these companies that are doing all this in advance of his coming. When the Antichrist comes, all these conglomerates, all these industries like Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and some of these others, they're going to give him control and ownership of these industries. So there's not going to be anywhere you can go as a competitor to get anything. When the Antichrist comes, I guarantee you the cash system is going to be gone. 95%, actually over 95% of the world's transactions are electronic. That means they can control all the money. So what's going to happen is it's going to be a system where all your finances are going to be tied to that number, which is going to be in that chip. I believe it's going to be likely the microdust. It's going to be in your right hand and your forehead. It's going to seem really convenient, though, for people, how they're going to sell it. Yeah, you don't worry about it getting robbed. You'll never get robbed. You don't have to worry about swiping your card anymore. Nobody's going to steal any money out of your account because it's all going to be tied to that one number. And when you go to the store, you don't got to pull out no wallet needed. You just swipe. Or you have the option maybe have it something read forehead when you go out of Walmart. So you won't even need no cash register. I mean, you just have to get scanned, and it automatically attributed to you. Probably have a pad, and you can determine which of your line of finances, be it retirement or cash savings, and it'll draw that from that account. There's a couple commercials already about that out right now, where they show the guy go to the store and he buys all this, picks up all this stuff, and he's walking out, and as he's leaving, this red light flashes, and his picture comes up, and then he walks out and he walks right past the security guy. But they make it look like the guy is robbing the store, but they're just trying to show how convenient things are supposed to be when you to make purchases, and it's going to seem secure because I can't get robbed. This stuff's tied to me. There's no way. And also on the law enforcement legal side, they'll claim it to be the way to stop drugs. How can drug dealers move things in all the finances and movement of money are electronic? And how can you do that without it being tracked? Because I can tell you right now, working in finance or have been in finance industry now, the hardest crimes to get away with are ones that are done through moving money electronically, because it's so much easier now for these are called forensic auditors, and these guys can go in. Forensic auditing is amazing. How I'm completely shocked, had no, it's like a whole new world that you don't even know exists unless you've been in it. How they can track the movement of money and see every place it went, every penny, where it came from where it came from to where it ended up getting spent. And they're going to use that to be able to, unfortunately, control what you can do and shut you down. This coronavirus and the system, this contact tracing that's coming up, mandatory vaccinations. Basically, don't worry about the vaccination. It's the information transferred as a result. Is all part of the plan to completely control every aspect of your life, to where you can't do nothing that a central system is not tracking. Now, we as Christians, all we can do in this time period is pray. And according to the scripture, it tells us to lift our hands and rejoice because Jesus is coming back. Our redemption is nigh. The rapture means to be rescued. So snatched away. We're going to be snatched away right before this all goes south. The Antichrist is coming. Much of his handiwork is going to take place. We're not going to get to see him. Not trying to. We'll be out of here before he can even reveal himself. But understand the things that you see going on when you hear about industries being swallowed up by other industries, large corporations coming together, like when Comcast made that purchase a few years ago. When you hear about large corporations merging, it's a consolidation of power, so that way it can be controlled by the one. That's why the symbol you see in the occult and high levels of the occult is the pyramid, being wide at the bottom, but at the top is a central point of control. At the top is made so the one coming can control everything. And what we're doing, unfortunately, the media is doing their knock-up job of having you distracted about this, having you distracted about that. Unfortunately, now you got everybody distracted about race, this, and that, while behind the scenes, behind your back, they're doing everything else, setting everything else up, and the knife that they're going to stick in your back is massive, because there's going to be such a feeling of betrayal once all these things started getting implemented. Once you start turning around and going back to the freedoms that you normally had being gone, you're going to be remember back, or telling your kids, like, I remember we used to be able to do this, or we used to be able to do that. And then nowadays, like, no. I mean, whoever thought we'd have the day where you can't get within 6 feet of somebody standing in line. You know how long that makes the lines now? You can't go to the movies. Who would ever thought a couple years ago this would have happened? And It was done, if you really think about it, during a time period when the research in a lot wasn't even known about the virus, but all this stuff got implemented during 9/11. All those security and laws regarding surveillance were changed. People were focused on terrorism and Al Qaeda and all these other things, while at the same time, unbeknownst to you, you were losing your freedoms left and right. The ability to surveil you and watch you has exponentially grown, even to the point where we're willfully inviting a lot of this invasiveness in our homes with the devices that you see in your home. You can be talking and it's recording. Alexa, and you got to wonder, if you're talking, Alexa heard that. You know, Alexa heard everything else you were saying 5-10 minutes before that. So it's invasive. Your smart TVs, all these things, you know, they can be hacked into. I mean, I work in one of my certifications in IT. They can track everything. It's called these devices in your home. And if you got one of the new smart washers and dryers, they know the last time you did a load of white clothes. And they might want to tell you, hey, you know, them tomatoes you got in the back in your refrigerator, when you got a smart refrigerator, you might want to switch those out. Because we're in that type of world now. We're in that type of world where things that were impossible before that the Bible's talking about now are possible. There are things that the Bible talked about years ago, you know, well, actually a couple thousand years ago, that people just had to be shaking their head, wondering what they're talking about. And here we are today, watching it happen, watching it come together. So as Christians, let's pick up the praying, pick up the witnessing, make sure you share it with your friends, because what's at stake is heaven or hell. What's at stake is eternity. What's at stake is, it's everything. It's everything. It means everything. And you wouldn't want your worst friend to suffer missing out on heaven, and the consequences are eternal. So let the love in your heart move. Let the love in your heart for Christians. I'm speaking to you. I'm looking right at you. Let the love in your heart cause you to forgive and witness to people that you don't like. Your boss, the guy sitting next to you never spoke to, your neighbor, somebody. You know, we got to get out there. The Bible says the harvest is ripe and it's ready, but the laborers are few. So let's just pick up on the numbers and increase the workforce for the work of the Lord. And I pray for you and look forward to shooting out another video. Hopefully, I'm praying I eventually get this streaming situation rectified so I can start doing it live and give the live classes again, because that's much more fun. I like being able to answer the questions that pop